I'm just gonna start up here so we can have some more time for some questions at the end here. Let me share my screen here, and I'm going to see here, and let's go. Okay, I'm here. I'm kind of jumping back and repeating one of Nina's slides, and I thought it'd be a good place to start with. The forms of academic integrity, plagiarism and unauthorized collaboration. And I'm going to touch on a little bit on Eric's question here. And what I'm really going to talk about is some technology that we see that sometimes works well to detect plagiarism. Sometimes it doesn't work so well. And then how people are using technologies like, from simple technologies like Google Translate to maybe introducing new AI technologies that actually write papers. And my feeling is that, yes, that is more rather than plagiarism, it's unauthorized collaboration. Although some things like Google Translate are kind of treading the line because they are what we get is things like translingual plagiarism, where they're translating papers from other languages into English, and we'll see that. And so I'd like to move on to the next one. So on a basic level, the one that every high school student kind of knows is the cutting and pasting, the importing of somebody else's language into yours. And then we also have the improper use of someone else's ideas, and this is a much harder one to dissect or to unpack, really, because the idea of I own my own knowledge, and what I have as knowledge is my intellectual property or something like that may change across cultures. In more collective cultures, there's much more of an idea of collective use of knowledge. And so the levels of citations, what people need to cite, things like that aren't quite as cut and dried as they are. And so at USC, it's simple. I say, we're here on ground at an American university, and we follow these rules, which in some cases may be a little too strict in terms of, is this knowledge one person's or is this knowledge widely shared? In other cases are pretty cut and dried. So this is where the kind of intercultural idea comes in a little more. Everybody knows when you import a large chunk of language in and just copy and paste that's kind of plagiarism. But what is, whose knowledge is what? This can be a broader area. And then there's intentional versus unintentional plagiarism. And I see both of these quite often. Unintentional plagiarism, you might ask, well, how are you doing it unintentionally? To go back to what I just said before, if you really don't think that knowledge was directly related to some person or some study, and that could be kind of unintentional plagiarism. The famous case of this is from music, where a member of the Beatles, George Harrison, was sued for a song, and he said, well, I didn't mean to copy it. It was in the back of my head somewhere. And they called it subconscious plagiarism, which was, I think, what the judge said, and that kind of went into our language. I call it unintentional, but what I see a lot of is sometimes the knowledge thing, but also people not being able to, they're kind of looking at what they're writing and looking at what they're importing, and they're writing a little bit too close to it. They're not actually trying to just grab it, put it in there. It's just they're coming too close to what they're referencing. And sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it isn't. And so I talk about that a bit in my class, and some examples of it here. I mean, this is, I think, a pretty blatant example of intentional plagiarism. They just, this author was a bit probably lazy and just was importing things. And the thing is, if this author had quoted or cited, because these weren't even cited, they were not quoted and they weren't cited. The publisher recalled these books, I believe, and shredded them after the books came out. But this could be okay if it were either slightly better paraphrased or had more quotes in it and was cited, but it was missing both the paraphrasing and the citations. So it's kind of blatant on both ends of it here. And what students most now commonly encounter plagiarism through, or their ideas of plagiarism through, is the Turnitin plagiarism checker. A number of institutions, it seems like most colleges I'm running into are using Turnitin for student papers. It compares writing to, basically what it does is it compares writing to an ever-growing database of other student papers, as well as articles and journals. It's not perfect by any means. I see it doesn't catch things that haven't been uploaded. So if people are going from newspapers, people are going from this, it might not catch them. It will also catch things and cite it as being from another student who handed in a paper at another university, which was copying from the same article. It doesn't give you always the original thing it was taken from. There are also concerns about privacy. I have students who are working on sensitive research, and they've been told not to put it into Turnitin because it's basically gathering this huge database of writing. So I can usually tell when somebody, and usually when I'm working with students at that level, we have a conversation about this, and I'm not that worried about it. But I think generally there are worries about the fact is that they're, getting this great database of everybody's writing, and it's kind of, people are forced into doing this. Often you don't really have a choice. You're turning it in through Turnitin. You can opt out, but people don't really feel comfortable opting out sometimes. So let's look at Turnitin a little bit here. This is your kind of classic cutting and pasting plagiarism. Huge chunks of language that are just imported. I don't see this that often. I've seen it when I was working with high school students, but I don't see it that often currently where I'm working at, where people are just basically stitching together something that they've imported. Now here is, I leave Turnitin on for quotes because I like students to see that the quotes are from other things and they're doing this properly. So this isn't really the plagiarism because it's a quote here. Turnitin is checking it. You can turn off the quote checker. I like people to see the language is the same. Some professors turn it off because they don't want students to ask questions about it. I like students to see it. This next one here is what we see a lot of here. And this is people trying to paraphrase things and kind of getting halfway there. And there are questions here about what plagiarism is here. It's cited, Oxford, part of the Oxford transport strategy. Well, that's the name of something. You're not really plagiarizing something where you're taking a name here. But when we see later in this, where we have traffic and residential levels and then low emission areas. So basically, this is where somebody's starting to do it and they're not really good at paraphrasing. They tried to paraphrase, but they didn't really get there very well. And LEZs, these things like home zones, LEZs, Oxford, all of these things are pre-Euro 1 vehicles. These are all not plagiarized things because they're the names. It's when they get down to the bottom of this paragraph where they've started just using large sections of the sentences before. Yeah. Now, I often have students ask me, can I see Turnitin? You know, I want to check my own paper before I turn it into you. And I kind of say, the answer is, well, you'll see it when you turn it in. You should recognize, and I talk about strategies for paraphrasing. And so, but there are ones that individual writers can use here. Grammarly is an add-on on MS Word. You have to subscribe. Grammarly is good and bad. It has some good things and it has some bad things. Its plagiarism checker doesn't have nearly the vast data bank that Turnitin does. And so it probably isn't catching as much here. Another thing is Grammarly, I find, this is off base from this, but it sometimes doesn't give the best advice. It says for people always to be active and direct. It seems to default to that. And you don't want to write in an active, direct voice if you're dealing with a deaf problem, you know, and things like that. So Grammarly, it's great for some things. I don't think it's the best for that plagiarism, but it will put up papers on there and it will show some of it. Scribr offers a service that partners with Turnitin, and so they kind of have Turnitin in the database and they have access to that, and that's a new one here. So now Google Translate is an interesting thing. I've used Google Translate when I'm trying to edit papers, and it's a paper that somebody's written in English, but I also have the original language version of it, and I know the language well enough that I can do a little bit of check on it. Google Translate, it works well for small segments of sentences. When you start putting whole sentences into it, it starts to get a little bit more confusing. But that's kind of the issue with Google Translate, is you need to know the language well enough that you might be able to write in it to check with Google Translate and not have the questions where it's giving you awkward sentences. So if you're familiar enough language and you want to use Google Translate as a checker, like, I'm not sure if I'm using this phrase correctly, it works very well, but just like, I want to translate my paper into language A, B, or C, I'm going to start dumping it through Google Translate. It comes up with some pretty funny things. Here's what I've discovered also, is it can appear as what we call mosaic plagiarism, where if you're running it through Turnitin, what you have, mosaic plagiarism is stitching a whole bunch of different sentences and different sections together. Google Translate tends to translate a lot of things in the same way. And so I have had students turn in papers and it came back looking like a rainbow from Turnitin. And I said, well, I don't think you were copying from the University of Nebraska, the University of New York, the University of this paper from that. He said, no, I was using Google Translate. And what it was doing was, all these other students were using Google Translate. So it was just getting where Google Translate had been used all over the place before. So it wasn't really their writing. So is that, going back to Erica's question, is that unauthorized collaboration or is that plagiarism? If they were directly taking the language from another paper and not trying to change it that much, then it might be that, translanguage plagiarism. If they were just kind of trying to translate a bunch of things and putting it together in their own way, then maybe it's unauthorized collaboration. It's kind of a gray area, but it's definitely not your writing, which is what it shows up as. AI writing tools here. Now, this was written by the AI program GPT-3. Now, I would probably, if I had a student in my class and I'd seen their writing and they brought this in, I'd say, this doesn't look that much like your writing here, because it looks like kind of a standard flat, it has this very standard flat academic content. Also, it's interesting, the article that I got this from, which Eric shared with me actually, it generated wrong citations. And so, it was generating this and it was looking for the citations, but they were wrong. And so it wasn't perfect by any means. And so, somebody handed it in and somebody caught it through the citation, they'd be like, what citation are you using here? And you wouldn't be able to answer. So it did generate some citations that were kind of off here. So it's not perfect. But here's the question here. Some of these tools are really fine in certain circumstances. Like I used to do quite a bit of editing across for clients in China, Japan, Korea, all through kind of Northeast Asia. I'm doing some of it more. I'm doing less of it over the years. And one of the reasons is these Google Translate and tools are okay in situations where people used to not have access to it. Say you're at a university in China, and just for the purpose of that university, you have to submit an English language version of your master's thesis along with your native language version of it. Now you could, and it's not going anywhere. It's just really for it's a requirement at the university. And I used to see a lot of these. And so, I check them and do it. But it wasn't going to be published. And if it would probably need some work. But if you want to use Google Translate or use some AI tools to help you turn in your English version that you have to submit along with your version written, it's probably fine. And a lot of people are used an in-house thing. Say you're working and you have to summarize a bunch of papers, and you might use AI as a help with that. You should be honest about it. You should say, yes, I'm using AI as help with this. And so these are places where these can be helpful tools. It's not, for publication where you're saying, this is my writing and I'm putting this out there. But if you're submitting for publication, what I have seen sometimes in the past, and this was more in grammar, is this kind of, it's a little bit of bullying. It's linguistic discrimination where people are saying, well, this doesn't look like it was written by a native speaker. And really, they're taking some issue with some of the ideas in it. They don't like the paper that much, but they've got extra ammo because the paper wasn't as well written as they thought it should be. And that, you could see that where if somebody is writing a paper that looks kind of perfect because they're using a lot of AI, probably the editors of magazines would look at it and say, this doesn't look like it's written, this has no personality, this looks like it's written by a machine. And they're going to be asking the author questions about it. What do you think about this? Why did you write this way? In the revision process, they're going to be asking a lot of questions. So you could, you open yourself up to the same type of charges as bad grammar. You're not doing your own writing here. And so my short answer here is there are places where, this can be very useful and it's absolutely fine. But there are places where, it's not fine because it doesn't fall in line with academic integrity. And B, if you had a couple mistakes in it, but it showed your personality and it was obviously written by you, that would look a lot better than something that looked like it was run through a machine to smooth it out. And I'm just going to get to my last slide here on paraphrasing strategies. Paraphrase or quote is the first question. In sciences, people rarely quote, and I tell my science students, it's like, sorry, you have to paraphrase almost everything. It's your job to boil down the language and paraphrase it. My law students, on the other hand, I get some of them where they're really stringing together papers full of quoted material because the language has to be directly from the source. They can't change the language that much. So, that's the first question. We usually paraphrase for segments of language 5 more words or more, but think about it. The United States of America, that's, a number of words or names of things. It's not as cut and dried. What we need to do is we need to paraphrase parts that aren't names or aren't stock phrases. Stock phrases aren't really plagiarism too. There are phrases that we all use, like it must be noted that everybody says that. You're not plagiarism. But where you get it is if you're using a lot of the stock phrases and names and you're not doing your own writing and you're kind of putting together a lot of things from another paper using the same stock phrases and names, then you end up doing that kind of what I would say like unintentional plagiarism. You're using that. 2 strategies, really. Chunking is what most people use in difficult writing. It means breaking up sentences into meaningful chunks and rearranging them, using both synonyms and grammar transformation. Here's where changing active to passive works, using different types of verbs, making a longer sentence into a series of shorter sentences. These are all good strategies for doing that. And I teach a lot of this. I have some longer sentences and I say, where are you going to chunk it? How would you transform this into a passive, and or how would you break it into a number of shorter sentences? Whole meaning is the other one. And often people are able to do this with thoughts or idiomatic phrases or things like every cloud has a silver lining. Well, that means, in problems, there are opportunities and things like that. And so when you see phrases like that, you can often just take an idea and put it in your own language. So using both of these strategies for paraphrasing is good. And I think we just have enough time to get to some, I'll stop sharing some questions, and I know we probably have a few here. So let me stop sharing here.